Adesso do la parola a Antoinette Nikolova, che è di Balkan Initiative, il cui studio ha, diciamo, innescato il processo che ci porta qui oggi in questa sala.
Sì, è un'organizzazione che analizza l'ecosistema dei media e lo scopo del nostro lavoro è analizzare e informare le istituzioni su problemi e eventualmente varie soluzioni e raccomandazioni per una, diciamo, policy di creare resilienza nelle nostre società democratiche. Detto questo, cercherò di stare nei 5 minuti. L'idea per organizzare questo convegno oggi a Roma è venuto in seguito di un evento simile al Parlamento europeo, dove abbiamo presentato i problemi della cosiddetta infodemia. Perché? Perché viviamo in un mondo molto dinamico, cambia tutto molto velocemente come tecnologia, una notizia di qualsiasi tipo gira alla velocità dei secondi come un virus, purtroppo di questo se ne approfittano le forze che vorranno influenzare in qualche modo nel loro interesse, che spesso è contro gli interessi di una società democratica, e purtroppo le resilienze, il nostro sistema immunitario è più lento. E quindi lo scopo è di fare questo discorso qui in Italia, soprattutto perché a 100 giorni dalle elezioni europee la disinformazione è considerata una delle minacce più gravi, come ha menzionato l'onorevole Cesa, e è importante che noi ci parliamo. Poi la disinformazione o la propaganda, o possiamo usare tante parole, ormai si usano per queste cose, è ormai un'industria, e quello che si vuole evitare è che in questa industria involontariamente ci sono i brand e i marchi occidentali che magari si trovano involontariamente a finanziare gli interessi di qualcun altro. Noi abbiamo analizzato bene la situazione nei Balcani, che è un terreno, diciamo, di gran appetito per tante forze geostrategiche, e magari qui in Italia non abbiamo visto fatti di una disinformazione eclatante come nei Balcani. Do subito un esempio: in Serbia esattamente 2 anni fa, quando Russia ha invaso Ucraina, è uscita uno dei giornali più diffusi, prima pagina, con il titolo "Ucraina ha attaccato Russia". Ecco, in Italia quel sistema, meno male, nell'Europa occidentale non esiste, però ciò che vogliamo parlare e dirsi qui tra di noi, come evitare che accanto a una notizia simile ci sia magari un brand occidentale che si trova, senza sapere, finanziare una cosa del genere. Noi non vogliamo nominare varie società, però quando li abbiamo nominati nel Parlamento europeo sono molto contenta di dire che abbiamo avuto anche un impatto positivo, in quanto 2 delle società tedesche che erano implicate in quel tipo di pubblicità hanno chiuso i loro contratti con dei siti del genere. Detto questo, do la parola ad Andrea.
Io la parola la passo subito a Peter Horrocks. Ci illustrerà innanzitutto il rapporto da cui è nata questa iniziativa, e poi più in generale, visto che lui anche fa parte dell'autority britannica che sorveglia le telecomunicazioni, di come loro cercano di affrontare questo tema. È un tema che, se posso dire una cosa, mi sembra, di fronte alla minaccia, facciamo nomi, russa, che incombe su di noi in questo momento. Le democrazie sono di fronte a una doppia sfida, secondo me. Da una parte appunto contrastare la disinformazione, dall'altra riuscire a farlo restando democrazie, quindi senza stabilire ministeri della verità, senza ritornare a durante le persecuzioni maccartiste, cioè abbiamo un percorso molto stretto e molto difficile da seguire, ma riuscire a farlo, se riusciremo a farlo, riusciremo anche a salvare i nostri valori di democrazia. Peter, your floor.
It's very inspiring to be here in Rome, one of the cradles of Western democracy and rational debate. An inspiring time to think about how information improves democracy and is healthy for society. My career, as Andrea has explained, at the BBC was about high standards of journalistic information countering authoritarian influences around the world. And now I'm a counterpart, a sister organisation to Mr. Lazzarella, the regulator in the UK. The regulation of traditional media, particularly licensed broadcasting media, is relatively straightforward. Not easy, but relatively straightforward. And I was involved in the decision to take Russia Today off the air in the UK. We may talk about that later. Thank you. But the world that we're now in is so much more complex, obviously. In digital, there are fewer points, there are fewer places where a regulator can intervene, and it's so much more difficult to control. And as we'll hear from our colleagues who will be joining us on Zoom in a minute, the complexity of the value chain digitally just makes it much harder to find the right interventions. So this study, of which we have extra copies here for those of you who are interested, I suggest we should take this morning as a case study. So not everyone will necessarily be specifically interested in the Balkans, but the Balkans, some EU countries, some non-EU countries, is a place where the extremities of the information war are happening. And I think we can all learn from that, from whichever country we are in. So as Antoinette has explained, our study looks at the advertising market. It looks at the international brands, the US and the European brands that are advertising in those countries. It lists the euros and the dollars that are being spent. And then it shows how that money is buying adverts that are appearing alongside the kind of disinformation that we've heard about. We heard the example of a Serbian website that reported that Ukraine had attacked Russia 2 days before the invasion actually started. In Bulgaria, an opinion in relation to Ukrainians that they have been, quote, trained to kill, burn, dismember, and wipe Russians off the face of the earth. And only a few days ago, in Serbia, a website reported the West murdered Navalny. Now, it makes you laugh, but it's not funny, because we have evidence that those views are believed by people in those countries and in others. And of course, it's not only about political disinformation and security, it's also about things that matter directly in people's lives. Notoriously, in the pandemic, the vaccination rates in many of the countries where Russian disinformation and general disinformation was higher. So I think it's really important to understand that this disinformation isn't just about specific security issues. It's having a wider corrosive effect on public trust in institutions that has a material impact on the lives of citizens. But as we've heard, the research that we've done and the publicity that received, particularly through the presentation we gave in the European Parliament, has created peer pressure, has created reputational pressure, and a number of companies have stopped advertising on the websites that we called attention to. So let's move now to the things that can be done to address a problem that I think we all share. There's the role of the platforms, and I think there are some encouraging signs that platforms are starting to take things more seriously. And the focus of this extraordinary election year around the world is proving helpful. The UK's Interior Minister and Home Secretary is in Silicon Valley this week and is speaking to the platforms, and he has spoken about what he's referred to as a perfect storm of deep fakes from generative AI, but the platforms are responding. They've announced that they're creating so-called election war rooms to be able to respond in real time to issues of disinformation during this year of elections. And I think the role of the relatively recently passed EU Digital Services Act, which requires the large platforms to have procedures against disinformation and election manipulation, that will provide a real test, and I suggest we all watch very, very closely and apply pressure, and I'm very interested to hear from our colleague from Ofcom about the Italian government's plans in relation to that with the EU elections coming up. But it isn't just a responsibility for companies, for corporates and their advertising, it isn't just a responsibility for regulators and governments. It's a responsibility for all of the actors and the people who are in this room this morning. So if you pick up a copy of our report, you'll see a summary of our recommendations, and I'll go through those. So for those global brands, adopt ethical advertising policies, make sure that they are carrying out due diligence, that they know the sources, the platforms that they're advertising on, and use those advertising revenues to support high quality media. It's a really positive thing that can be done, as well as negative things which some people might criticise as censorship, but supporting high quality media. The advertising companies and the digital intermediaries, will hear more about those. They must be following the policies that those international organisations have agreed to, but which are being ignored in practice. And they should be refusing to put content on platforms that have poor standards. The NewsGuard organisation does a great job in ranking and assessing all sorts of news websites. For civil society, for NGOs, there's an importance to have engagement with the private sector to put that pressure on and to help with public understanding and digital and media literacy. And lastly, for policymakers, they must hold governments, they must enact regulation that targets disinformation, and they must promote transparency and accuracy, so more information to enable us to have the proper debate. A debate that's appropriately happening here in Rome, that great cradle of democracy, and I look forward to hearing the other contributions and your questions later. Thank you very much.